When you hear the word Buddhism, what's the first image that appears in your mind? Maybe it's a serene monk in saffron robes, meditating under a giant Bodhi tree. Maybe it's the sound of temple bells echoing through the mist of a distant mountain. Or perhaps, in our digital age, it's an icon on your phone, a meditation app promising 10 minutes to inner peace. These are beautiful images, and they're not wrong. But they are only fragments of a much larger picture. And if you stop at these fragments, you risk missing the real, beating heart of what early Buddhism was meant to be. Because here's the thing, Buddhism, in its earliest form, was never meant to be a secret treasure locked away in monasteries. It wasn't designed only for the chosen few who shaved their heads and retreated from the world. It was, from the very beginning, a living, breathing system for everyday people. For farmers, for merchants, for mothers and fathers, for kings and servants, for anyone who faced the chaos, the heartbreak, and the uncertainty of being human. Yet somewhere along the way, the image of Buddhism in popular culture shrank into something narrow and distant. We've been taught, often unconsciously, to see it as either a spiritual escape from the world or a quiet hobby for stress relief, a religion of renunciation, or a kind of mental spa treatment. But early Buddhism was neither of those things. It was not about turning away from life, and it was not about softening reality into a cloud of feel-good tranquility. It was about seeing reality so clearly that it changed the way you lived in it. Radical self-understanding, courageous honesty, a freedom born not from running away, but from facing the truth head-on. And this is where the story becomes personal. Because whether you live in ancient India or in the complex web of the year 2025, the core human struggles are the same. We may give them different names, anxiety, burnout, overthinking, identity crisis, but the roots are familiar. The same craving for control, the same fear of loss, the same restless search for meaning in an unpredictable world. The Buddha understood these patterns over 2,500 years ago, not because he was a prophet predicting the future, but because he studied the mind with relentless precision. He saw that the forces shaping our inner lives are timeless, and he offered a way to work with them, here and now, without requiring that we abandon our jobs, our families, or our responsibilities. This is the untapped power of Buddhism. It's not about becoming less human. It's about becoming more awake while being human. But here's the challenge. Most of us have inherited a version of Buddhism that feels like it belongs in another world. We see the robes, the chants, the incense, and we think, that's beautiful, but it's not for me. Or we download a meditation app, treat it like a digital vitamin, and wonder why our stress still feels the same. What if I told you that early Buddhism was far more practical and far more revolutionary than this? That it wasn't just about calming the mind, but about transforming the very way you see yourself and the world? That it was designed to be lived in marketplaces, in kitchens, in moments of decision and conflict, not only on mountaintops? The problem is not that Buddhism has lost its power. The problem is that we've hidden that power behind layers of exotic imagery and half-understood cliches. We've made it seem like wisdom is something you have to travel to find, when in truth, the Buddha's message was that wisdom is already in the way you relate to your own life, if you know how to look. So here's the invitation. For the next part of this journey, I'm asking you to set aside what you think you know about Buddhism. Forget the tourist brochures and the social media quotes with lotus flowers in the background. We're going to step into a time before the word Buddhism even existed, to the days when it was simply a path walked by ordinary people who wanted to understand themselves and live without the weight of constant fear, anger, and confusion. And then we'll bring that path right back into 2025, into your phone notifications, your career decisions, your family conversations, and your late-night thoughts that keep you awake. Because the truth is, you don't need to be a monk to walk this path. You just need the willingness to see your own mind clearly and the courage to live differently because of what you see. That's what early Buddhism is really about. And that's where our journey begins. Let's start with one of the most stubborn ideas about Buddhism, the belief that it's only for monks. It's not hard to see why people think this way. The most visible symbols of Buddhism today are monasteries, saffron robes, and the image of the monk in deep meditation. And historically, yes, monks and nuns played a central role in preserving the teachings. But if we go back to the earliest days, a surprising truth emerges. The Buddha did not create his path only for the ordained. In the early scriptures, we see merchants, farmers, soldiers, artisans, even kings sitting at the Buddha's feet. They didn't abandon their work or their homes to benefit from his guidance. They came with real-life questions. How can I run my business without harming others? How do I deal with grief when my loved ones die? How do I make decisions that don't lead to regret? And the Buddha gave them answers, not vague platitudes, but practical strategies for living well while staying fully engaged in the world. One famous example is the story of Untapped, a wealthy merchant who became one of the Buddha's most generous supporters. He wasn't a monk. He had a thriving business, employees to manage, and a household to care for. Yet he applied the Buddha's teachings in the marketplace, not the monastery. He practiced generosity in how he treated his workers, mindfulness in how he conducted trade, and compassion in how he spent his wealth to help the sick and poor. This was not an exception. Lay practitioners, ordinary citizens, made up the majority of the Buddha's followers. They weren't told to withdraw from society, but to transform their relationship with it. In modern terms, that means Buddhism isn't just for someone who retreats to a temple in the mountains. It's for the software engineer balancing deadlines, the single parent juggling work and family, the entrepreneur making tough ethical choices. You don't need to shave your head or give up your career. What you do need is a shift in perspective, to see that every interaction, every decision, every moment of your day is part of the practice. Your office can be your monastery. Your commute can be your walking meditation. Your kitchen can be the place where mindfulness turns cooking into a spiritual act. Buddhism for monks is one version. But Buddhism for everyday people? That's where its untapped power comes alive. Another popular image of Buddhism is the idea of detachment, as if the goal were to float above the messiness of human life, untouched by its pain. People imagine Buddhist practitioners as serene figures who have risen above all earthly concerns. And for some, this sounds appealing, an escape from stress, drama, and disappointment. But this is a misunderstanding, and a dangerous one. The Buddha never taught people to avoid life. He taught them to understand it so deeply that they could live in it without being enslaved by it. There's a difference between letting go and running away. One is strength, the other is fear. Renunciation in early Buddhism wasn't about abandoning your responsibilities or shutting down your emotions. It was about giving up the clinging, the desperate, grasping need for things to always go your way. It was about loosening the grip of attachment so you could respond to life with clarity instead of panic. Here's the thing, when you stop clinging, you actually become more capable of engaging with the world, not less. If you aren't obsessed with controlling every outcome, you can listen more deeply in conversations. If you aren't terrified of loss, you can love more fully without constant fear of being hurt. If you aren't enslaved by your desires, you can make decisions based on wisdom instead of impulse. Think about 2025. We live in a time where constant stimulation and nonstop news can make us feel like we're drowning in information. The instinct to escape is stronger than ever, binge-watching, scrolling, numbing out. But early Buddhism doesn't tell you to unplug forever or to hide in a cave. It gives you the tools to stand in the middle of the storm without being blown over. The image of the calm monk under a tree is inspiring. Yes, but imagine if that same stillness was inside you while you were negotiating a contract, caring for a sick parent, or navigating a tense meeting at work. That's not escape. That's power. The goal isn't to leave the world. It's to stop being trapped by it. If you ask most people today what Buddhism is about, they'll likely say one word: meditation. And it's true, meditation is an important part of the Buddhist tradition. It's one of the most powerful tools the Buddha taught for understanding the mind. But here's the catch. In early Buddhism, meditation was never meant to be the whole path. It was just one piece of a much larger framework, a framework the Buddha compared to a wheel with 8 spokes, the Noble Eightfold Path. Yes, meditation is there, in the spokes of right mindfulness and right concentration. But before those even appear, the path begins with right view and right intention, learning to see reality as it is, and aligning your motivations with compassion and wisdom. It includes right speech, choosing words that heal rather than harm. It includes right action and right livelihood, living in ways that do not cause suffering for yourself or others. And it includes right effort, cultivating mental habits that support clarity and freedom. In other words, meditation is the gym where you train your mental muscles. But the rest of the path is where you actually use them in daily life. The problem with the meditation-only view is that it can turn Buddhism into a private escape, a quiet corner where you focus on your breath while ignoring the ways you speak, work, and make choices. The Buddha's vision was far more integrated. He wanted people to meditate, yes, but also to examine their ethics, their relationships, their sources of income, and even their patterns of thinking. It's like learning to swim. Meditation is practicing in the calm, safe pool. But the other parts of the path teach you how to swim when the waves get rough, in your workplace, in your family, in the world. So if you've been avoiding Buddhism because you think it's all about sitting still with your eyes closed, it's time to expand your view. The heart of the path is not just found on the meditation cushion. It's found in the way you show up for life. If we strip away the stereotypes, the rituals, and the centuries of cultural layering, what remains at the center of early Buddhism? It's not faith in a god. It's not obedience to a set of commandments. It's something far more radical, self-understanding. The Buddha did not ask his followers to believe him blindly. In fact, he warned against accepting something just because a teacher said it, or because it was written in a scripture, or because it was a tradition. Instead, he urged them to test everything for themselves, to see whether it led to more suffering or to more freedom. This is a revolutionary approach even today. But in the Buddha's time, it was almost unthinkable. Most religions demanded unquestioning faith. The Buddha offered investigation. At the heart of this investigation is one of his most profound insights, anatta, the understanding that there is no permanent, unchanging self. On the surface, this sounds abstract, but its implications are deeply practical. We spend so much of our lives defending a fixed identity, the me we think we have to protect, promote, and perfect. We build stories about who we are, and then suffer whenever life challenges those stories. The Buddha's insight was that this self is not a solid object. It's a constantly changing process, made of shifting thoughts, feelings, and experiences. When you see this clearly, something amazing happens. Criticism doesn't hit as hard, because it's not attacking a permanent you. Failure doesn't feel like the end of the world, because it's just another moment in a flowing stream. Even success doesn't chain you with fear of losing it, because you know it's part of life's natural change. This goes directly against the culture of 2025, where identity is often a product you brand, polish, and broadcast online. And that's the radical heart of early Buddhism. It's not about building a perfect version of yourself to parade to the world. He promised that you could stop suffering over the fact that it does. If all of this sounds inspiring but still a little distant, let's bring it right into your everyday life. The power of early Buddhism isn't locked in the past. It's meant to be lived right here, in the world of 2025, in your phone buzzing with notifications, your calendar full of overlapping commitments. Becomes a practical framework that can be carried into your work, your relationships, and even the way you talk to yourself when no one else is listening. It begins with clarity of mind, not just knowing how to focus, but knowing what to focus on. In a time where attention is the most valuable currency, managing your mental space is no longer optional. It's survival. Early Buddhism teaches you to see your thoughts as passing weather rather than absolute truths, which means you can choose not to be swept away every time a storm rolls in. This clarity makes space for the next element, ethical grounding. In the Buddha's time, this meant refraining from harm in speech, action, and livelihood. In ours, it means asking hard questions about the ripple effects of our choices. What does your work contribute to the world? Does your daily routine quietly harm others, even indirectly? The path naturally flows into wise speech, which has never been more urgent than in the era of instant communication. The Buddha understood that words are not just sounds. They are seeds that grow into trust or distrust, conflict or harmony. In a digital world, this means slowing down before firing off that angry comment, resisting the bait of online outrage, and choosing words that clarify rather than confuse, connect rather than divide. Imagine if even a fraction of our conversations, online and in person, were guided by this principle. the change would be seismic. Balanced effort is the next thread in the fabric, and it's the antidote to both burnout and laziness. Early Buddhism warns against two extremes: exhausting yourself in constant struggle or collapsing into inertia. The middle way here is about knowing when to push forward and when to rest, a rhythm that allows growth without self-destruction. It means learning that rest is not a failure and discipline is not punishment. Finally, there is liberating insight, the perspective that frees you from being crushed by life's inevitable changes. This is where the wisdom of impermanence and the understanding of the not-self idea merge into a practical superpower: adaptability. In 2025, change is relentless. Careers shift overnight. They are a way of moving through the world, a quiet, steady reorientation of how you think, speak, act, and see. And the beauty is, you don't have to master them before they start working. Choosing rest at the right time can turn exhaustion into sustainable energy. And perhaps most importantly, each of these steps is something you can practice while still living your life exactly where you are, in the middle of the noise, the responsibilities, the unpredictable messiness of being human. That was always the point of the Buddha's path, not to escape the world, but to learn how to live in it without being owned by it. So here we are, standing at the edge of an old path that somehow feels new again. We've walked past the cliches, the robes, the temples, the app-based meditations, and we've uncovered something deeper. A vision of Buddhism that was never meant to be locked in a monastery, never meant to be reserved for people who disappear from the world. Instead, it was designed for people who live right in the middle of it, people with jobs, families, ambitions, fears, and messy lives. People like you. If there's one truth that carries through every teaching we've explored, it's this: you don't need to be a monk to live with wisdom. You don't need to escape life to find peace. It's about renouncing the clinging that turns every change into a crisis. It's not about becoming some idealized spiritual version of yourself. It's about seeing the truth of who you already are, not as a fixed object, but as a living, changing process. And in that seeing, everything shifts. You realize that clarity of mind is not a luxury. It's your anchor in a distracted world. Ethical grounding stops being an abstract moral code and becomes a way of moving through life without constantly second-guessing yourself. Wise speech transforms your conversations from weapons into bridges. Balanced effort keeps you from burning out in the name of progress or wasting your potential in the name of comfort. Liberating insight lets you ride the waves of change instead of fighting a battle you can never win. The Buddha's teachings are not antique artifacts to admire from a distance. They are tools. They are living technologies for the mind. And like any tool, they only work when you pick them up and use them. That doesn't mean overhauling your life overnight. It means starting small. A pause before you speak, a mindful breath before you react, a moment of reflection before you choose. You don't have to believe in anything. You only have to notice the difference these small steps make. And here's the secret the Buddha himself would tell you. You don't have to take his word for any of this. Try it. See for yourself. What if the answers you're searching for are not hidden in some distant future, but right here, in the simple act of seeing clearly and living wisely? The invitation is open. And another, until you realize you've been walking toward freedom all along.